see.
And
hey, I know a bunch of these people.
good. All right. Just keep another minute, see if anybody needs to get in.
Fantastic.
All right. Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and start if you guys are ready. So I'm Jackie with Hub City. Thanks for joining us for our conversation with John Lane and Thomas McConnell. I'm going to just give a quick bio on both of them for you. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat window. And after we've talked for a little bit and John Lane has done a couple of readings and Thomas McConnell has asked him a few questions, I'll start voicing questions from the chat window. So please feel free to ask or comment or whatever you like in there. So we're going to start off with John Lane, and he's of course the author of Whose Woods These Are that we're talking about today. John Lane attended Wofford College, the Broadlow School of English, and Bennington College. Among his many awards, his selected poems Abandoned Quarry won the Southeastern Independent Booksellers Alliance Poetry Book Award. His nonfiction book Coyote Settles the South was named a finalist and a Nature Book of Uncommon Merit by the John Burroughs Society. And his novel Fate Moreland's Widow was named Independent Publisher Silver Medalist. One of the founders of the Hub City Writers Project, John Lane lives in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we're very happy to have him today. Talking with him and having some great questions for him today is Thomas McConnell. He is the Hub City Press author of The Wooden King, which won the 2019 IPPY Award Gold Medal in War Maritime Fiction and was shortlisted for the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award. His work has appeared in the Connecticut Review, the Cortland Review, and Shenandoah, among other publications. He has received the South Carolina Academy of Authors Fiction Fellowship, the Hackney National Literary Award for the short story, and his story collection, A Picture Book of Hell and Other Landscapes, was published by Texas Tech University Press. He teaches English at the University of South Carolina Upstate, and we're very grateful for both of you guys for joining us today. And I will go ahead and pass it over to John Lane.
Wow, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Hub City Writers Project. Thank you, Mercer University Press, for taking a chance on this novel. It's hard to do today, especially in this pandemic paranoia we're in right now. I'm really excited to be here. I think every book that I've published in the last, at least the last 15 years, has been launched at the Hub City Bookshop. And so it's kind of exciting, as always, to be here. So this is a second novel of mine, and Tom was gracious enough to read it and blurb it. And so I really wanted him to be able to talk with me about it, because I really admire his work, particularly The Wooden King, and just it means a great deal to me that you're here, Tom, and thank you so much for doing that. And so I think what we're going to do is just launch into a discussion, and we're not going to try to go any more than 30 minutes at the most, and then we can have a few minutes of questions and answers after that. So Tom, here we are.
Well, John, I know that you've got some passages that you want to read, and I think the book has such a musical quality. It's the lyricism of you as a poet that really comes through on every page, and I wondered if we could start with that.
Yeah, I think that that'd be good, because the book happens in one day. Four narrators kind of pinballing through this landscape, this river bottom in fictional Morgan, South Carolina, that everybody will recognize as having many traits in common with Spartanburg. It's the second time I've used this setting. It was also in Fate Moreland's Widow. And, but it starts, even though it's one day of Thanksgiving in present day, it sort of starts with this cosmic nature, big nature moment. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to read about 3 minutes right at the beginning, and you'll see how I kind of telescope down into the smaller story. The first woods grew up far back in time, ancient as the last ice age, back beyond any notion of what we call now. For eons, the woods, most of it deciduous, cantilevered, stable, rolled unbroken in every direction, untroubled except by an occasional cataclysmic storm or raging lightning-sparked wildfire. The space undulating in hilly ridges and deep-cut floodplains, someday to be called the Piedmont. If the woods were steeped in anything back then, it was deep rot, and rot stained the loamy shadows, almost a rainforest, and filled the air with a fecund scent. To have entered those woods would have been to give way to a place of impenetrable density, a green wall of entwined smilax, poison ivy, muscadine, Virginia creeper, and crossvine. The old pre-settlement woods had a reverent quality to them, as deep woods always do, but the recent woods weren't such a grove, sacred or otherwise. There was something more undersized about them that a word like grove did not embrace. By post-settlement times, the woods were a remnant, what was left of the remaining upland southern hint of primeval forest, the big woods itself, little patches of it miraculously surviving and emerging whole into the present every morning, like it was the first day of creation, this one stretching over sections of 2 full USGS quads, if what you understand best is maps. The woods could still seem vast, except for places where there were a few game trails, some widened by the regular treading of Jay Mitchell, who now, generations later, hunted there almost daily. The contemporary ridges were spiked with volunteer and planted pines high up next to where Long Shoals Road now ran, in the mixed pines and hardwoods, cascading down the slopes all the way into the bottoms, thick with oaks, hackberries, hornbeams, beeches, sycamores, and matted mud and a macadam of fallen timber on the bottom's floor. Once you were down in the bottom at river level, it was still bug ruled and humming all the way to the stream through pawpaw, box elder, ash for almost a mile. And then if you crossed at one of the shoals, it was a mirroring mile of forest up to the top of the next far ridge on the other side. The slopes were so steep in places, it was said no plow had ever pierced them. The topsoil might have been 20 inches deep at those spots, and there were few gullies, slashes through the forest, a feature common to most Piedmont land. There were dark ovaline cliffs that some people called a gorge, like something you'd see in the mountains. The rocks were raw and weepy in one particular stretch of cliffs, and though they weren't as narrow as a slot canyon, in that place down there, where the cliffs were only 30 feet apart, the sun only penetrated at midday. The woods were known and familiar. The trees all had names, scientific and common ones, and all autumn they shouted at the dawning days. There were 14 different species of quercus, oaks with leaves like hands, stained copper yellow and bright red by November. There were other yellows too, the high ground hickories and the poplars, and there were streamers of tangerine sourwood branches bursting from the leaning trunks of the mature twisted trees, the forest contortion artists, anything to find the light. The scarlet of the dogwood understory sprinkled down the slopes, speaking their language too. The maples had their dialect, red as flame. And then the closer you got to the river, the sweet gums and the sycamores yelled burnt orange verbs at the dawn. Jay still called this place the woods, but there was no denying it had been owned and surveyed over time. On some of it, the title changed hands often, and on other parts, the title floated from generation to generation, encumbered and unencumbered, depending on how much attention the owners paid to taxes and wills. There were property lines, some even painted on trees. Some were recently delineated by stabs of rebar, pounded into the earth and tied with orange survey tape, or with their tops painted bright yellow. Even though the woods had been divided up by legal transaction, it was still more than what a contemporary manager of space could grasp or understand. It was often because of slope, a logger's unsolved conundrum, a real estate agent's never listed vexed holding. All these experts lacked the tools to contain the woods on a spreadsheet. for eons, treetops to bedrock. Through all this time, the woods told its story to those who would listen. But the people who had lived there for 200 years made their stories too. And they planted the stories in the woods, the way maples spread their helicoptering seeds in the spring. The stories floated down and rooted in the land. But we are not dealing with eons here. The heart of this story takes place in only one day, mostly in one place, those woods.
John, I'm really glad that you started with that prologue, because it's important on so many levels. Like you said, there's this almost cinematic zooming in from a big overstory view, right, spiraling right down into the woods. In terms of plot, it introduces us to all the places that we're gonna need to know. In terms of language, I mean, there's almost this Whitman-esque indulgence in a catalog of these wonderful nouns: smilax, hornbeam, poplar, hackberry, all the the things that you don't normally come across. So it's such a wonderful introduction to the book. And of course, it begins with nature. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know place is really important in this.
Well, one of the things that I don't know, maybe somebody heard this in there, I'm not sure. We don't, novelists don't get reviewed much anymore because there just aren't many places people review. But one of the books that was really important to me in the last 48 months would be Richard Powers' The Overstory. And I think that one of the things that he does in that novel, that massive novel, it's about 7 times as thick as this one, is he gives you that sense of an overpowering nature in which human beings are still embedded. It's almost like the opposite of what they're telling us today about the Anthropocene and how humans control everything and the planet is, we're in control of everything. I really wanted a sense in this book of an overstory of this time, and then I wanted to juxtapose that with this one day. I wanted to try to write an entire novel basically in one day, but then at the end it spirals out again a little bit. Not quite this much, but there is that. And so I really wanted that sense that nature was bigger than we are, kind of like one of those Chinese paintings, where the little person's here and the big cliffs are here. And I mean, that's always one of the reasons that I've always loved Chinese painting so much. It gives that sense of scale and scope.
Right. And often there's a tiny human figure or two in that landscape in Chinese.
Trail going up into the deep mountains.
And that's the way we begin with this. Yeah. The other aspect of this, it seems to me, that this passage introduces is narratively, prospectively, from point of view. We begin with this third person narrator, but you've got a whole cast of characters that comes after that, and you engage with 4 of those as narrators. Do you have some passages from them you'd like to read?
Yeah, and I also shift point of view, and as a novelist, Tom, that it's just so hard to decide the point of view and the perspective. And I knew I wanted this third person omniscient point of view to begin the book and to end the book. I end with it, but I wanted all of the 4 narrators to be first person, and so I dropped from here into there's sort of this kaleidoscope of these 4 characters, and you keep getting their perspective on an event. Somebody said this isn't a whodunit, it's a did he do it. And
that's true.
What happens is this first character, Jay Mitchell, is a young hunter who's also a landscaper, and he's out hunting his family land on Thanksgiving morning, and he runs into a doctor who owns the surrounding 1,000 acres, and that doctor's name is Old Doc. And I want to read the passage where Jay runs into him, and he runs into him, and he can't figure out what's going on with him. Something's wrong. He's run into him one other time. Let me see if I can get here. He's run into him one other time, and Jay can't figure out what's wrong with him. He's in his 80s, mid 80s. Jay hadn't seen him in a couple years. The old man can't recognize him. And he's kind of come down out of a tree stand with a rifle and confronted Jay Mitchell on his own uncle's land, on Jay's land with a rifle. The old man doesn't know who Jay is. Jay Mitchell, remember? That's our deer. My grandson shot it, the old man says again. You leave it alone. Your grandson, back there, he points the barrel of his gun. It's his first hunt. He's 12 years old. I squint. I can't see anybody else in the stand. I've heard his grandson has shot plenty of deer. He's Caddy's age, in his early 20s, not a child anymore. Caddy's his girlfriend. Doc, you okay? You need some help? Leave that deer laying, old Doc waved his gun around. It's my grandson's. I shot this deer, I say slowly. You watched me with binoculars. Keep loading that deer on that four-wheeler, the old man says. He inches closer, pulls his rifle up to his shoulder and aims it point blank at my face. I put my hands up like an outlaw. Hold on now, Doc. This is my four-wheeler. You hold on. You're trespassing on my property. You're the one trespassing, I say. You're on my uncle's property. Your line's down there toward the river. This is my property as far as you can see, and that's my grandson's deer. He holds the rifle up higher. Over my dead body, you're stealing his deer. You load it up and drive it over there. Just hold on, I say. I climb slowly up on the seat of my four-wheeler with the deer's antlers in both hands again. I heft hard until the deer slides up on the rack behind the driver's seat. That's right. You put it up there and strap it on. I pull out my utility straps from under the seat and pass them back and forth across the animal's body until the carcass is secure. I torque it down. Drive on down there to the stand. I don't understand what we're doing, but I do what he says, driving the four-wheeler slowly in low gear off the ridge to their tree stand. The old man walks behind with the rifle. When we get to the stand, I climb off. I don't see your grandson anywhere around, I say. That tree stand's empty. It's none of your business about my grandson, he says. The hell with you, old man, I say. What are you doing? Shoot me, I say, and turn around on the seat and take out my knife. Put that knife away. He waves the gun around. I cut the two straps holding the deer, and the animal sloughs off the rack and into the dust under the tree stand. This is it. This is as far as I'm putting up with your bullshit. Old Doc waves the gun in the air wildly. Strap my deer back on that rack. That's my four-wheeler. I climb down and take a quick step forward, surprising him, grabbing the barrel of the gun and pushing it down. Old Doc pulls the trigger and shoots into the dirt, just missing my foot, making me even madder. Son of a bitch! I push back harder on the barrel. Old Doc lets it go and the rifle flies away. Just like that, the old man falls and his head bounces against the tree, holding the stand. He sprawls spread eagle on the ground before me and looks like a lifeless bag of bones staring up at the sky. I realize how fragile the old man is. How is it that his family's left him out here in the woods alone? Doc, I lean over, but the old man isn't moving. His eyes are open, but he isn't focusing on anything I can see. I lean close to the old man's face, pull up the collar of his hunting jacket, and see blood on the back of my hand. Doc, I ask. I wipe the blood away. Old Doc finally looks around and sits up. I step back. You okay? I ask one more time. He's dazed. I said, are you okay? Then I hear a four-wheeler in the bottom. Is that your grandson, Doc? I don't know who it is, he asks, like it's some sort of children's game. Then suddenly he turns a corner and he's out of his mind again, with the same look in his eyes he had before, the one that made him look like a crazy river rat. He stares frantically in all directions. Where the hell am I? Who are you? That's my gun and that's my deer. Where are my grandchildren? Where's my son? He touches the back of his head, falls on the ground again, holding his head with both hands. Hey, why does my head hurt so much? I haven't thought about the man's son in a long time, and I want to avoid doing it now, but I can't. I remember the scene with Darren Pagano, his son. He'll shoot first if he sees me standing over his father. Old Doc stares up at me like he thinks I might just know some answer he's waiting for. The four-wheeler sounds too close for comfort. You hit your head, Doc, that's all I say. I leave the deer line, straddle my four-wheeler, and drive away. And old Doc disappears after this.
Yeah, that incident becomes the propelling episode for all the rest of the book. You begin with that long sweep of time, which you
Yeah.
read, but you narrate in the present tense, and I wondered, I find that a very interesting and daring choice. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I really wanted it. I really wanted to string it out, Tom. I wanted to make it feel immediate, and I wrote this book all in third person one time, and then I wrote it again in first person past, and then I put it back into first person present because I felt like it just compelled it more. It compelled the story more, and it also made that one day seem more profound for me or something, that idea of the one day. And I guess I didn't think about it being edgy or, you know, taking a chance. I just liked the way it felt so much. I really struggled with first person in this book. I mean, I struggled with point of view in this book. That whole section of time at the beginning was not even in the book until the last draft. The book started originally with Caddy at the Zippy Mart, at the Zippy Mart on the Ridge, and she gets a call. And then Jay's story happened 30 pages into the book, and Betsy helped me with that. Actually, she said, "You got to move this thing." She's always helping me, but she says, "You got to move this moment where he has with old Doc closer to the front." So now I think it happens within 12 or 15 pages of the beginning of the book.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an important choice. As is present tense, I think. I mean, I find it interesting. I didn't know that you had tried virtually every other angle before you landed on this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that thing that James Wood quotes? And Dino, my friend Dino Trake has told me who actually said it the first time. He can type it in. But that thing of the house of fiction has many windows but only a few doors or something like that. Right. Well, I tried every damn door. I tried coming into the story through every door.
It's all trial and error, right? Yeah, that's just it. Well, since you've talked about Caddy and she becomes the other half of this love story, which is also at the center. Did you want to read something about her?
Yeah, there's a little Caddy passage. Caddy's got a history. Caddy is Jay's girlfriend, but she's also got a child by him. And they've broken up, but Jay's still mooning for her pretty bad. It's been a couple years. He hadn't really gotten oh, that's it. Henry James, House of Fiction. Thank you, George. So the House of Fiction, is that like the House of Song that Leonard Cohen talks about? So Caddy got this history with Jay. She was his girlfriend. She has a child by him, and she wanted to be an artist, go to college to be an artist, but she got pregnant and she ended up dropping out of the community college she went to, and so she ends up a cop. She ends up a county cop, and she hates it. Her father had been a cop and got her a job. Her father dies in the book, and that's sort of another plot wrinkle. But Caddy gets the call that something's happened in the Mitchell Bottoms, and so she has to go and she has to interview Darren Pagano, the evil son. He's actually a stepson, but he's been adopted, so I call him the son all the way through. So she has to go, and she has a little history with Pagano too. She hates his guts. She played volleyball with his daughter, and he made kind of a halfway pass at her at a party at their house once, and she remembers it. And but here's where she meets Pagano the first time. This is just a few. Oh, and another point of view is Sheriff Howard. He's kind of this Andy Mayberry type sheriff that doesn't want any military equipment, and he thinks everything's going to work out all right. And he doesn't think Jay's done anything wrong, and all the way through the book, he's kind of stretching the whole thing out. So that's who Sheriff Howard is. And here's Caddy talking about meeting Pagano the first time. Sheriff Howard preaches what he calls boots on the ground. Says he wants investigating officers checking behind one another, what the textbooks at the police academy called science, logic, and law. But for right now and into the near future, my boots will be the only ones on the ground here. I take some strength from the only friendly things around, the golden broom sedge shimmering close to the road, and the canes of a dead blackberry bramble crowding the gate. To look even more professional and to give myself some cover, she's not a very good cop. I pull on my broad-brimmed hat I've been holding in my hand, pull out my notebook, and ask the first important professional law enforcement question of my career. What's the problem this morning, Mr. Pagano? My father's missing. Dr. Pagano? Yeah, everybody calls him Old Doc. Maybe missing, maybe something else. Where? Down in the Mitchell Bottoms. What was he doing down there? Hunting on our land, Darren says. How old is Dr. Pagano? 82, 83? Is his health still good, I ask? Somewhat. I scratch out a few notes. Was he hunting alone? The kids drove him in and set him up. What's that been? 2, 3 hours? How'd you find out there was a problem? He called the kids on his cell, said Jay Mitchell was poaching a deer. Jay Mitchell? I'm a little stunned. I pause for a moment. Yeah, Darren Pagano says, Jay Mitchell. I think you know him, don't you? Thank you, Mr. Pagano. That'll do for the moment. I need to go call the sheriff and brief him. And then she goes staggering off, basically, because she's just been told that she's searching for the father of her child down in the bottom.
The way she wins her way into this, and then is surprised that the suspect happens to be the father of her child and her former flame. Yeah,
she won't even answer the call. She's sitting up there eating boiled peanuts and throwing them to a dog in the parking lot of the little cricket, and the radio's ringing, are calling, and her phone's ringing, but she doesn't want to answer it because she just is lazy and just wants to sit there. And then when she finally answers it, the dispatcher tells her there's this call, to go down into the Mitchell Bottoms, and she knows it's too close to home.
Her name, to me, brings us. I mean, now that we're into the characters, it's going to be so fun to talk about them. So Sheriff Howard, I keep thinking of Ed Tom from No Country for Old Men, the other famous lawman, and Caddy. Well, of course, the most famous Caddy in American literature is Caddy Compson from Faulkner. But Faulkner, it seems to me, you were talking about the Overstory and Richard Powers earlier. It seems like to me, and maybe this is something you'd like to talk about, Faulkner seems a very powerful influence over this book in some respects. I mean, there's narratively, there's the overarching voice at the beginning, and then there's the four first-person narrators. That reminds me very much of As I Lay Dying. The postage stamp of Earth and Morgan and Place, of course, is Yokta Patofa. I mean, and Caddy, it just seems, there's a whole lot here, and I wondered if you might speak about that.
Yeah. From the beginning, I think I've told you this, but when I first started writing novels, I knew at the very beginning, I was a big Faulkner fan, and I knew that I could never write in his style. That would be like, what was it? So Flannery O'Connor said, you don't want to be on the track when the Dixie Express comes through. And I knew that I was never going to write page-long sentences, and I was not going to use a lot of semicolons. I mean, no one is going to read my books and go, this guy writes like Faulkner. But I was very interested in Faulkner's material. I was from The Bear through all the way that nature is a backdrop. There's even a couple of critical books completely on Faulkner and by environmental historians and the way they read the landscape in Faulkner. And I knew I loved that. And I also knew that I loved the idea of creating a mythical place. I talk about this all the time with my friends. Why is it when, say, somebody starts off, George is on, I think, and George likes to make up places and put people in them, but everybody goes, oh, that's Greenwood, or oh, that's that, but he makes these places up and then places people in them. And I wanted to make up one place, one county, And I wanted to write a number of novels, not 17 like Faulkner did or whatever it was, but a few novels placed in that place. And everyone 100% fiction. And so I started out when I wrote my first couple novels that weren't published back in the 80s and the 90s. They were set in Morgan, South Carolina. And they were stories that sort of tied into things that I was interested in writing about in Spartanburg. And another reason I wanted to do that was because, and I mean, somebody can correct me here, but I don't think there's a published novel. There's more than, I can't think of published novels about Spartanburg. We can go to Greenville. We can go just 30 miles away, and there are 4 or 5 or more novelists over there through time who've written novels, Max Steele and Mindy Friddle. I mean, there's Tommy Hayes. I mean, there are a number of people who've written novels about Greenville, either the fictional Greenville or Greenville with the name Greenville. And I wanted, from the very beginning, when I started writing fiction, I wanted to somehow write books that engage the themes of this place. And that's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I tried to do in Fate Moreland's Widow. I've got a new novel I'm working on that's set in 1881, right after Reconstruction. So Faulkner always was hanging over this thing. And this book, I read and listened to Absalom on tape the year before I started this. And I said, there's no way that I can write a book like Absalom, but I can take a few of the themes and I can fold them in. And the dog chase scene in this book is a lot like the dog chase scene in Absalom, the hounds in the field, Quentin's in Absalom, Caddy's not, but I wanted there to be a few places in the book where people went, oh, there's a reference to Faulkner, a slight reference to Faulkner. In the first one of The Big Woods, I used the term The Big Woods in that piece I read at the beginning. Right. And I don't remember, you might remember, Tom, but we went through so many revisions at the end on this book. But does Jay still have a scene where he talks about reading the bear? I think he does in high school. Yeah, and I wanted that. And there's one other clue in the book that I think you maybe picked it up, but Dino would pick it up, George would pick it up, there are a few other of you guys would pick it up, but most people would let it pass right by them. And that's when Jay's father's grandfather sells a pasture to send Uncle Ernest to school. And that's what happened with Quentin in Sound of the Fury. And I wanted to sort of plant that in there. So there are just tiny little hints through it that this book at least has some of the same themes as a Faulkner novel.
No, he's a presiding genius here. That's for sure. One of them.
The emphasis on genius.
Right. Did you want to? Is there another passage you'd like to read?
There's one more that I would like to read, and that is one of the best characters for me, 2 characters that don't get a point of view chapter, but they really are Jay's father, Jacoby, and his uncle, Ernest. His uncle, Ernest, is a librarian, had been a librarian at a college, and he's retired, and he still lives on the land in a little brick house up on the road, and it's Ernest's land that Jay hunts. And when Jay's ping-ponging through this bottom, running from the law, one of the things he does is go to Ernest's house twice. And he goes to see his father, too, in a boarding house downtown. And Jacoby becomes a pretty big character at the end. But so this is another Jay, a little short Jay passage. He's talking to his uncle, Ernest. And he looks around the room and he says, there's a bunch of books here. Did you read them all? Have you read them all? Jay makes this joke. And actually that joke comes directly from some football players who were subletting my house about 20 years ago. And I came back from from vacation, and they said to him, said, Professor Lane, there's a lot of books in this house, and we figured that you had to read for 4 hours a day for 20 years to read all the books in this house. And I said, yeah, it's about right. So
Those football players are pretty good at math.
yeah, they were pretty good. They sort of figured by pages. So he's talking about these books, and he says, oh, and he also is mad at his brother, Jacoby, because Jacoby's stolen some timber from him. What are they about mostly? Genealogy, local history, almanacs, family histories, Ernest says, and then he turns serious. Now, to set you straight about me and Jacoby, we always had different ideas about money and land. I'm a conserver and Jacoby's a spender. Is it true you were so smart Daddy Tom sent you to town to live with relatives when you were 12? That's true, Uncle Ernest says. How'd it happen? Our father heard about this private school on the south side. He could see early that I was smart enough for that. Once a week on Saturdays, he hitched his mule and we boys climbed in the wagon and rode the 4 miles to town. Daddy Tom dropped me at the school library where Jacoby got in trouble with the older boys around the square. The librarian took a liking to me and let me check out 2 books a week. Where'd Daddy Tom get the money to send you to a private school? He sold that big pasture, Uncle Ernest said. Now it's part of the Paganos' land. You boys were different, I say. You went to college and graduate school, and Jacoby went to Vietnam and learned how to farm. Then Jacoby started to drink and sold that timber off my land. Uncle Ernest shakes his head and leans back in his creaking office chair. How in the hell did he think he'd get away with that? But he did get away with it. He split the money with that jackleg logger, if that's what you mean. Jacoby says the timber came off the land you bought from Aunt Sarah, and the amount of the timber sale was what you cheated her out of. He's got some mighty strange logic. If he thought he was Robin Hood, why didn't he give that tree money back? Maybe he was drinking too heavy to make rational decisions. Yeah, he drank up most of that money and bought another moped, Uncle Ernest laughs. He was a piece of work back then. He's sober now, feeling the tug of eternity, is he? Might be. If he comes riding up to the pearly gates on that moped, first question and written in St. Peter's book be why he never paid me back for my timber. So, there was one other passage, a short passage. This is when they're running with the dogs. This is just a couple paragraphs. Jacoby's got a couple old Walker hounds and a pit bull that he used to hunt with, and he's brought them back down. Sheriff Howard's convinced him to bring them back down and hunt for old Doc. So they're sitting around a fire, and they start hearing the dogs. And somebody asked me how did I know about this, or where did I get the background to write a scene like this? Well, this comes right out of Coyote Settles the South, because I've got a whole chapter in there where I went to North Carolina and I spent all night out with these fox hunters chasing coyotes. And I got to hear the dogs and run with the dogs and all that stuff. So now the patience starts, Jacoby says as he walks back to his chair and sits down once more. I sit back down too and listen to the voices of the hounds converging. When the 2 hounds finally bay, it sounds like they doubled back, and they aren't more than 100 yards beyond the light of the fire. They got something now, Jacoby says. He pulls out his old hunting horn and gives it a short toot, and you can tell he's out of practice. The sound squeaks at first, but then builds into a blast. The horn rings through the wet woods, calling the hounds back. But they come and circle through the campsite, barking and howling near the fire again. They circle the stand at a full gallop and then shoot back out into the dark. I would have never believed dogs can make so much noise. After they leave the firelight again, I barely see them moving in the privet. The little pit bull sits at Jacoby's feet at the edge of the rope, at the end of her rope, her tail erect like a radio antenna and rotating in a tight wiggle. How long will this take, I ask? This is Sheriff Howard's chapter. When they catch on, we'll go cross country with them, Jacoby says. All they're doing now is bearing in. How will you know they've caught the right scent, I ask. I'll hear their voices change, Jacoby says. It won't sound like gossip anymore.
I couldn't read that passage without thinking of the bear.
Yeah,
that was,
yeah. Remember in Absalom, there's a big dog chase too, but the bear is
Yeah.
The bear's a good one too.
Yeah.
And then also there was what was his name? The wonderful Tim McLaurin. Tim McLaurin's got a great book with a lot of dog hunting scenes in it. George can probably name 12 others. So
I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, I could go on and on, but Jackie, do we have some other questions that we should turn to? I don't want to deprive people. I don't want to deprive people the chance to ask John and talk to him.
I'm going to go to gallery view.
Not at all. You guys have been great.
Pat Conroy's here.
we have a lot. There's most people have been sending the questions to me privately, so you probably haven't seen them popping up.
Nope.
But you just mentioned George, so I'll ask his question first. He said, "That's a great scene when Jay takes apart the shed, steals the planks, and makes dog houses. Where in the world did you come up with that? It's perfect."
George, I actually heard when I was going to buy a place in the mountains. Betsy's heard this story. I was looking at two places. I was looking at the place I ended up buying from Thomas Raincrow up near Silva, and I was looking at another place up on a hilltop with a 360-degree view in Little Canada, and they were the same price. And I'd go back and forth trying to figure out which one of these places. And then I was up there talking and around, and this guy told me a story while I was up there about some guys getting mad at the doctor who'd owned the house down the hill, and they'd been hunting on his land, and he tried to get him arrested, and the sheriff said, "You don't want to arrest those guys." And he said, "Yes, I do. They're trespassing on my property." He said, "You don't want to arrest them." "Yes, I do." So he arrested the guys, and the doctor went away for the winter, and he came back the next spring, and his house was gone. It wasn't burned down; it was missing. his mountain house, and they had taken that house apart plank by plank, and then they had built rooms on their own houses. all over Little Canada. There were houses with new room, two or three of them, had new boards and stuff. And the doctor sold his land, and my little piece of it would have been one piece of it. And I've been trying to figure out, is that a short story, or is that a novel, or is that a scene in a novel, ever since I heard it. And I was really happy when I got it in there.
He's laughing in the chat. We had another question from Michael. He said he wants to know whether the Faulkner references in the book are simply for John's enjoyment or for another purpose in the relationship of the author and the reader.
I think the main reason I put them in, Michael, was I really do want to publish all these novels about Morgan. I've got 2 of them now, and there's about 5 of them total, and I don't know whether I'll get it done or not, but if I do, I want people to think about the ways I put together this county. And I don't want to be compared to Faulkner, because I'm going to pale, I mean, with what he did, but I at least want people to try to take the books that seriously, of trying to fit them together and fit things together when they're reading these books. And so I wanted those references in there for that reason, for my enjoyment, but also sort of to plant little things that somebody might see and go, "Oh, I wonder what's going on here. Wonder what's going on with that."
Thank you. Trey asked, I think he meant to say a theme that you can reveal?
What? I'm sorry, one more time.
Theme. He asked what the theme was.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, I was always taught, and I always told my students when we were reading anything literary, a poem, a story, a novel, that one way to find the theme of something is to look at the title of the thing. That it's often, not always, but it's often a big fat finger pointing directly at the theme. I think that one of the major overriding themes of this book is ownership of land, and who owns land, and who has a right to be there, and what happens in spaces, and literally whose woods these are. I mean, when I was so excited when Frost's poem went out of copyright about 1.5 years ago, when I knew that I'd be able to use this title, because I thought I was going to have to change it. And then I did a little research and saw, oh, all right, they're going to be T-shirts now with Robert Frost lines on them. But I would say that one of the major themes is whose woods these are.
Thank you. Susan says you're putting our area on the map. That's all that's come up so far. Does anyone else have any questions? Ask
Anybody
away in
else
the chat.
about anything literary?
And I'm sure Dr. McConnell might have a few more for you too. Got about 10 more minutes. So,
All right.
any other
Good.
questions?
Those are great questions. Thank you.
They are. John, you talked earlier about the night you spent with the fox hunters.
Yeah.
And how that, and I sort of began by talking about you as a poet. And of course, that was your first career in some respects. And now you're into maybe your third, but then you're an essayist in the midst of all this. And I wonder if that is, since it's a prose art and it's also narrative, did you learn some things as an essayist that you've applied as a fiction writer? Or has that had an influence on you as a fiction writer in some way?
I think so. I'm not sure how. I think it's taught me how to revise in some ways, and how to make a list of things like, don't start sentences with it. Things like that. I mean, it really did teach me to pay attention. But also it taught me how to try to make places and people real. Because one of the things that I do in my essays is I have lots of characters in my essays. I go out in the field with people and I take notes like crazy, and I make them, if Gerald Thurman on tonight, see here anywhere. Anyway, my colleague Gerald Thurman's always mad at me because I turn him into characters and put him in essays. But I think that's taught me a lot about trying to create characters.
May I ask another question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Tom. Michael asked again, kind of related to that, which is why I wanted to ask. He's asked how you started out. Do you start with themed characters or like a combination?
Oh, yeah, one thing I wanted to say, this book is dedicated to my friend, Mike Willis. And Mike is a fabulous friend of mine. I've known him for 10 or 12 years now, and he spent about 10 years of his life making his living almost entirely on the Lawson's Fork and Packlet River as a trapper. And he knows more about the woods. He's a hunter and a trapper. He hunts for food. And he knows more about the woods than anybody I've ever met. And I go out with him every chance, although I'm not a hunter, I go out with him every chance I can get. And we are meat eaters, so we often ask him if he'll give us a little bit of the meat that he harvests, because usually that meat has been from the hostas that the deer have harvested around my house. So I feel like it's sort of a perfect circle in some ways. Mike is a great friend of mine, and Mike really gave me the idea for this book. We were driving past the big river bottom behind our house. We were going on a hike one day over in Greenville with our friend Drew Lanham, and Mike was driving past, and he just started talking about how much he loved this bottom and how much his family has loved it. He said, his grandfather supplemented his income as a mill worker at Glendale by trapping Lawson's Fork, and he he'd been hunting this land since he was a boy, and I started thinking about the depth of connection, generational connection of families to land. And I went home that, and also I started thinking about conflict over property lines. And so those two things, the generational layering and depth on a piece of property, but also what happens at the edges of those properties when sometimes the family owned further than they do now, and what happens when you get those conflicts. Because as Dino Trachis will tell you, if you take a course with him, in fiction only trouble is interesting. That's Janet Burroway's line. And I wanted to figure out where the trouble was. And the trouble was that tension on these property lines in this river bottom. And those are the ideas that got me started on the book. And I also had this character, and he sort of was based on Mike and some other folks that I know who are who is interested and is deeply involved in hunting as they are.
Thank you. I have another question, if
Yeah.
you don't mind. Michelle asked if you found writing the second novel any easier than writing your first, or was it about the same?
It was harder. I wrote and rewrote this book. I just couldn't, I didn't think I was ever going to get it right. And it had to do with point of view. It had to do with the characters. The plot, I was thinking about this the other day, and I told Betsy this. I think and I don't think this is a good thing, but I think that had I started a different way as a writer, I could have made a lot of money as a genre writer, because I love plot. I love it. And I love to make it work. I love to tinker with it so that it works. And I really, really struggled trying to figure out. I knew that I had this one day, and I knew I had this lost man, and I knew I had another man that they thought maybe killed him, and I knew I had a whole bunch of plot elements that I had to figure out. And the same with Fate Moreland's Widow. I really love plotting. I like plot more than I like character or theme or anything. I really, really do enjoy it. And I think that had I set myself to writing genre novels, I could have done it. I don't know whether I would have been successful, but I could at least give it a shot. I'm glad I didn't, but I could have done it. I don't think everybody feels that way. Tom, do you feel that way? Would you have been a successful genre writer?
I would be poorer than I am now.
We have a question from Jonathan Hopt. He asks, how many books are in Mount Lane now? And what prompted you to write a novel set wholly on Thanksgiving? Didn't some other upstate writers set out to write a bunch of stories set on different holidays?
Interesting. That's true.
I didn't catch that last part reference.
Word
sorry.
Singleton.
Okay.
I think that I have 18 books with ISBNs, and then I have a bunch of chapbooks and things like that. I have 2 novels and a bunch of narratives, book-length narratives, and 6 or 7 books of poems. And but the only thing that matters is the next one. God, Jonathan, I don't know why I set it on Thanksgiving. I wanted it to be cold, beginning to get cold. I know one reason was, and this all got cut out of the novel, but I had this whole scene that was one of the first scenes that I wrote, where Jay has been invited over by Caddy to Thanksgiving dinner so that her mother can maybe get over being pissed off at him for getting her pregnant. I thought that scene was going to be in the book, and I ended up cutting it. But I needed that Thanksgiving dinner.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions that we have, probably have time for.
Thanks to everybody. I think Ann, do you want to tell them about the buy one, or you want me to do it?
I can do it.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a ticket option for it too, but we are selling, if you buy Whose Wootsies Are, we're selling Fate Moreland's Widow, which is set in the same setting, for $5, and those are very nice hardcovers, so it's kind of like 2 books for one. So if you come by the shop, we can do that for you. Yeah,
and they're signed. Both of them are signed.
And I have the, see if you can, pretty signature right there.
I really appreciate everybody coming out. This is not the ideal way to do it, but it's really great to see everybody, all these great faces of all these people that I love here in the room.
You and Tom were absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I think we're going to say bye for tonight. And John Lane has a couple other book events, so keep track for other bookstores that will be hosting them. And we hope to see you in the shop sometime. Thanks, John. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good night.